We spent a lot of time talking about how we get into conflict and the elements of conflict, but how do we get out of conflict? And
Yes.
I mean, this is the kind of the meat and potatoes of this conversation. Like, how do we get out of conflict? And it doesn't have to be just political. It can be any high conflict situation.
I spent a lot of time with divorce lawyers and conflict mediators. And one of the things they found is that there's usually someone just outside of your lens who's fueling a high conflict divorce. Sometimes it's a lawyer, right? But sometimes it's a sister or a friend or a boyfriend, right? Or somebody is kind of adding fuel to the fire and they're whispering in your ear and they're framing everything that your ex is doing as a humiliation. And so if you can figure out who that is and ideally get them in the room, right? And try to figure out, so that's a conflict entrepreneur, right? In that case, try to figure out, is there a way to distance them from the conflict? If there's not, is there a way to speak to the part of them? So if they're 85% conflict entrepreneur, can you speak to the 15%? Like, what else do they care about, right? So that's one way to get a work around a conflict entrepreneur. It's not always easy to do. But for me, I'll just say personally with our political conflict, I've tried to turn down the volume on every conflict entrepreneur in my newsfeed, in social media, in my personal life. You know, it's not for me. Like, I don't want to be a conflict entrepreneur and I don't want to be exposed to that more than I have to, because I know it warps my thinking and it warps other people's thinking. So I don't engage in kind of, cold burns on Twitter. I don't find it fun anymore. I don't enjoy it. I don't watch comedy sketches that humiliate my opponents. I don't find them funny anymore. All that kind of stuff. I think once you see it as a conflict entrepreneur, once you know what that is, it loses some of its power over you. And it is really helpful to start by turning down the volume on the conflict entrepreneurs in your life and trying not to be one, right? Ideally.
What else do we need to do besides just identify these conflict entrepreneurs?
Other things you can do. So reducing the binary, like we talked about, you want to try to have more than two groups. You want to try to mix up the groups and really notice the people who don't fit. When we train journalists, we spend a lot of time on trying to find sources that are not easily pigeonholed, right, in one camp or another on a controversial topic. And there's a lot of people, most people are in this category. Like, to take an example, if you look at the polling on abortion before Roe v. Wade was overturned, for years, the polling showed that Americans were deeply conflicted about abortion, that most of them would literally change their answer to the poll if you slightly change the question. And what you saw is that people didn't know exactly what to think. And there was no simple answer. And they weren't comfortable with extremes of abortion on demand or full out bans of all kinds of abortion. So that complexity didn't get reflected in the coverage or in the way activists talked about it. But that is, in fact, the way it should have been covered, I think, and the way we can help each other see the complexity, that there are people who have changed their mind about QAnon. There are people who used to be this and are now this. Those are interesting stories. There are, 20% of Israeli citizens are Palestinian. They don't fit. And that's interesting, right? And in surveys right after October 7th, they felt more part of Israel than they ever had, in years. So this is interesting. The Palestinian Israelis.
Wow, that's amazing.
70% said they felt part of the country compared to 48% just 6 months earlier. So, there is really important, useful, interesting material here that doesn't get surfaced because we're collapsing into this binary splitting, right? So the more, at least for me, when I find stories like that, I literally will print them out and share them with 10 friends or put them on my wall, or, I do all kinds of things to try to remind my brain that not everybody fits into these categories that we get sorted into.